premiered at South by Southwest just a couple weeks ago, and this is actually the second festival we've been in. Sierra Leone wasn't exactly a festival. We were showing it in the districts where we'd filmed the film. So I'm happy to answer any questions. You know what
Where
you guys
did you live when you were filming that? Were you living in the village or near the village, or?
We would be in place. The film was made over 5 trips over 18 months, so it would be anywhere from like 10 days to 5 or 6 weeks. And
did you have to earn their trust?
because we came in, the FAMBUL TOK began. I was sort of right at the vortex at the beginning of it, because I was working on a still photography project, collaborating with Libby Hoffman, who's the executive producer of the film. And I met John at that time, and he had the idea but no funding, and so I introduced him to Libby. So I always had access because I was there from the beginning. I mean, John would explain to people, I think the thing that I most wanted villagers to understand, and I think that he did too, was that Westerners came and they covered that war, and they showed these unbelievable atrocities. I mean, if anybody remembers Sierra Leone in the West, which is sort of an ignored war anyways, but it's because of those horrible atrocities. And John would repeatedly say, Sarah's here to tell the story of who we really are, the answers that we have in our culture, of really the kind of peace-loving people that we are. So people would get that pretty quickly. But we constantly, the law of quantum physics of the act of observation changes. What you're seeing was always an issue because we're white, we had cameras, and historically that means the special court. So there were people who would be afraid to testify simply because we were there. But as we spent more time, and the Tomba Joe bonfire, we'd been in that community quite several times. So we were able literally in that bonfire, my director of photography was like standing right next to Ningami Joe and shooting. So it was just, a lot of relationship building. Sit, please, we're just making
while you were filming, was there any point where, watching the movie, I felt a lot, and I could imagine while you're filming it, was there any times where you felt kind of overwhelmed that, all these stories?
Heck yeah!
I could imagine there was one point where you're like, I can't do this today. Was there a point in that? Have you ever reached that point while filming, or?
I think the hardest day was probably when we interviewed Sara Numa after the bonfire. I did not understand, the translation we had wasn't really effective the night of the bonfire. That was always something we were catching up with. But I only understood that Numa had beaten Sara at the bonfire. That was the story I got. So we were sitting with the two of them in front of us doing the interview, and Sara said something about his father dying, and I said, what happened to him? And he said he was killed. And that was like just news to me in that moment, and I just sat there looking at the two of them, and Numa's face, is just so haunted in that space. And I just thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to ask this boy if he killed his best friend's father. And I finally did, and he says yes, and it wasn't until later that I learned it had come up at the bonfire. But Sara, when we interviewed him, said, well, I don't really know who did it because I didn't see for sure. And then Numa says that in front of me that he did it. And as the two of them walked away, my film crew just like burst into tears, so. Yeah. But I think it's not that, the stories are painful, but I think it's more about being just like cut to the quick by their incredible goodness, by this humanity that wants to say, in spite of all of that, it's more important to me that we come together as one again, and that's just such a huge thing. And the Savage showed up in the last 72 hours of our filming, literally. Last film trip, last 72 hours, we finally found him. And I only wanted to find him to have him tell the story of Tomba Joe from his point of view. I had no idea what we were walking into with him. And he, in November of last year, so 18 months after we first met him, he went back to Kono District to apologize to the people of the district, even though he still could have been prosecuted by a special court. He wasn't. We filmed it, and he actually was, I just saw him a couple of days ago at one of the screenings where he was comforting Sar Foindor, who had burst into tears again when he saw himself on screen, and I went outside and Mohammed Savage was trying to comfort him. So things like that, you're constantly...
How long a period did you take to do the whole film?
Filming took over 18 months. The film itself took about 3 years.
3 years.
Did you get a sense that the people really were, really forgiving each other for these atrocities? I mean, did you
Yeah.
feel this was genuine? Because
Yeah. I
it just
really
sounds a bit
tried.
unbelievable. It just sounds too much to believe to me, that you can
Why did they-
afterwards feel, just work, begin to cook together, eat together, live together.
It's why the film is so deliberately. It's not a typically structured film. It's my first film, but I sure have learned along the way that this is not a typical structure because I decided to take the point of view of the people themselves instead of standing outside of it as a Westerner and saying, "Oh, prove to me that forgiveness is possible." That's crazy. How can you do that? I decided I wanted to say, okay, this is what your culture is about. I want to see it through your eyes. So the film is constantly trying to walk you as a Westerner deeper into that culture. And there's some things like, because nobody said it in an interview that I couldn't quite use, but if you take, and I tried to get it through, if you take responsibility for what you've done, if you apologize sincerely, the cultural response is, I forgive you. It's not, I'm going to think about it, I'll get back to you, no, I'm still angry, it's, I forgive you.
Forget about culture. In the back of my head, I would think that
You
that
can't
could
forget-
happen again. That
You can't forget
that
about
could
it.
happen again one day.
You
That
can't
those
forget
people
about the culture.
that they turn on each other.
Why
like
did they
that.
war? Why did they war in the
I don't
first
think it's
place?
really a cultural thing as much
It is a
as human.
deep,
It's
no,
like
it is a
human
deep,
thing.
it is
No.
a
I
deeply,
think it is
never
the
be able
culture
to
because
trust- I wouldn't
there's
be able
no
to trust.
there's no jails there. They had no jails until this happened. So they worked everything out before this. They were
It's
able to. It was their culture to work it all
We're
out.
talking about your child. The story about the heads that were cut off, the children's head.
Did you see that woman in the third act who says, I said, did somebody tell you to say this or do you really feel this way? And she leans back and she looks and she goes, we can think for ourselves in this world. And she's there because she's that answer to everybody who's like, no, you can't forgive. She's really, because I ask that question constantly. The reconciliation takes time. The reconciliation is what those community farms are about. The community itself comes together to find ways to help victims and perpetrators work together.
Yeah, but this is saying that you can forgive, but you can't forget. And that's
Well, you heard
what
several
I'm
people say
thinking.
that.
I would never
So,
be able to forget, and which means I would never be comfortable, even as in spite of culture.
I think the film is uncomfortable because it's asking you to look at it from their point of view, not from ours. I get what you're saying as a Westerner, but your feelings as a Westerner, I guarantee you, are different than their feelings as Sierra Leoneans. We showed a sneak preview of this to some people last summer, and we had Sierra Leoneans with us, and people in the audience were like, no. How could you possibly forgive that? I think they were talking about Tom and Joe. And one of the Sierra Leoneans just looked at him, and he kind of smiled, and he goes, you're American, you don't understand. The need to the film asks you to step away from your personal opinions, our personal opinions as Westerners. And it's hard. I can guarantee you those are genuine forgivenesses. I've seen those people a year later, 18 months later. The issue of maintaining the health and the wholeness of community takes precedence for them, for every one of them, over an individual sense of, I've been wronged. Once the apology has happened, and once you have spoken in front of your community and apologize, acknowledge that you did something like that, beat a woman's child to death, and apologize for it. It's called naming and shaming. John referred to it. And believe me, we can't even imagine the shame that brings upon you doing that in public. You never want to do it again.
That savage guy could be forgiven and be reconciled into the community, that savage man?
It's taking time. I was there when he came before the community. That one's taking time. He's going back. It's been a remarkable thing to watch him. I'm incredibly uncomfortable with the fact that in that last interview where you see him crying, that I had compassion for a man who I'd seen as a stone-cold killer. He was the first perpetrator I'd ever heard of when I first went to Sierra Leone. But I've watched him over almost 2 years now, of his journey back into the community. And I've watched people take him in again, but they want to talk with him. It takes time. His isn't as quick as some of the others, where people could clearly see that a rebel forced them to do it. But